Mr. Bradley, it's your opportunity to speak to the topic of health care.
The United States Constitution has no authority granted therein to allow the national government to be involved in the process of the so-called Obamacare. And the states really need to resist this with all due diligence. They need to fight it through the courts. They need to seek its repeal. They need to seek its defunding through the United States constitutional process. And they need to do something that's rarely done in the recent century, and that is seek it through nullification. So I absolutely, unequivocally am opposed to this effort to socialize medicine. As to the states and their ability to do what you have suggested through Bernie Sanders and those in Vermont, I am of personal opinion, but I am a federal candidate, that it would be wrong for the states to do something like that also. I believe medicine is a very personal issue between a physician and a patient. And when America had the greatest healthcare process in the whole world, that's what it was based upon. I believe that since government has gotten involved in healthcare, they have destroyed that great system, and they're muddling it to the point that it's become unaffordable. As Mr. Granato has pointed out, as a small businessman, he can't even afford it anymore. That's because of government involvement. It was great before 1965 when government got heavily involved in it. So my recommendation would be that the states not consider what Mr. Sanders is offering, and that we go back to the way it was before. It's a proven path. Let individuals and their physicians and charities help take care of the problem.
That's time, gentlemen. I don't mean to sound disappointed, but you don't seem like you're stepping on each other's toes. And so if I'm missing a need for rebuttal time, please make me aware of this. If not, I'll move on to the next question. And my approval and my gratitude for the civil discourse, but don't feel reticent that you can take issue with each other in a more exacting fashion. Let's go back to our studio audience and we'll get another question. Maybe this will be that one.
A lot of public debate is focused on the high level of federal spending, even in a recession year. Over 42% of this year's budget was for the Pentagon budget, not even including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you support this level of spending on what is essentially a standing army, or will you seek changes?
Mr. Lee, it's your first opportunity to speak to the subject of defense spending.
One of the few jobs that the federal government has, one of the few powers that it enjoys under the Constitution, is to provide for our national defense. I'm reluctant and at this point unwilling to say that what we need is a cut in defense spending. We can, and I believe always should, be looking for ways to make our spending, including our defense spending, more efficient. I don't believe cuts are what we need right now in defense spending. This is our very survival as a people that we're talking about, our ability to continue living in this land. And we can't allow that to be threatened by anything. It's the principal reason why those 13 original states came together and formed a national sovereign, so that we could protect ourselves, we could protect each other. We've got to stay focused on that. If we lose sight of that, our very survival could be threatened. That's why I support a strong national defense and will continue to do so should I be elected to the U.S. Senate.
Mr. Bradley, your opportunity to respond on the subject of defense spending.
It's interesting, the military side of the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, there are several clauses that note the responsibility of Congress to make certain that the nation has a strong defensive posture. Others of the founders often talked of that too. And consequently, I believe that it is necessary, it's proper, that the United States engage in a proper military posture. Now, the debate about that has to do with, shall we be engaged in 130 plus nations across the world right now militarily? Do we need to have a presence across the nations of the world? That's where a very large percentage of this budget is expended. And the Founding Fathers, I believe, recognized the United States, it was necessary to protect our borders. It was necessary to protect our nation. And to have engagements, for example, in Korea that have gone on for probably more years than most of you in this audience have been alive, and held 30,000 troops there, and many other nations also. We're more interested, it seems, in promoting the defense of their borders, a 151-mile border, for example, in Korea against North Korea, than we are in defending our own borders. So my changes would happen to bring the United States back into a constitutional perspective of the purpose of the military. And we are not to be the policemen of the world. And all of these other things that you bring up are challenging, this off-budget spending. Oh my goodness, I hope we get a chance to talk about that, because I'm sure you'll find that I have a lot of opinion about that. We need to be more careful militarily.
Mr. Granato, your opportunity to respond on defense spending.
We need to keep our men and women in uniforms safe and out of harm's way. We need to look at every area that they're in, and I, as a businessman, would go back and look at how we're spending, where it's at, where we could cut, but never putting our soldiers in harm's way. We need to keep our nation safe. We need to keep our country safe. But as a businessman, again, I know how to spend. I know I can't spend it if I don't have it. We have too many attorneys in Congress that have never had to be in the trenches, never had to meet the payroll, and don't understand the dollars that are being spent. So I will look at it, I'll take a firm position, and we would take care of our country. Thank you.
Gentlemen, rebuttal? Let's come back to our studio audience, because we're going to change direction right now with a question of really individual liberty, isn't it? Yes. And let's let Scott Bradley have the first opportunity for this response.
There is a wave of anti-Islam and anti-Muslim sentiments in America today. Many Muslims in our community feel threatened, intimidated, and they feel like that their right to practice their religion freely is threatened. My question is, how, in your opinion, do we mitigate that tension between freedom of speech and freedom of religion?
Mr. Bradley.
Your question is not one that engages the national government. The Founding Fathers spoke in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. They enumerate a few of those rights, and then they say it's the purpose of government to preserve those rights. Well, then they wrote a constitution to make certain that that happened. And in that constitution, well, after they added the First Amendment, they guaranteed that there would be no national or state religion. But all in all, the engagement of the United States government in individual imposition of things was very, very limited. Tocqueville noticed some very interesting things in America when he came to observe America. He noticed that Americans lived their lives decently because they believed in God. And I believe this is an individual thing. I believe that tolerance and acceptance and caring are things that come from the heart. And to have the national government attempt to participate in that would be a grave violation of the individual choices that individuals make. So consequently, I would say that what we need is an engagement within each religion to reach out that way. And to stop trying to do one-upsmanship, to inflame and to in your face. I mean, this idea of burning Qurans or putting up a mosque in what some people consider to be a special place, both of these are inflammatory. And I think people need to individually back off and say, let's give every American a chance to live their religion and participate the way they choose.
Mr. Granato, your opportunity to take this subject up.
We all know that this country was founded on religious principles, the freedom of religion. We know that Utah was settled by Mormons that came here because they were persecuted in the West, or in the East. This has gone on forever. What we need is education. I do not believe that we have too much extremism, and people, for the most part, are good. We need to communicate. We need to show and teach each other what we're all about. We need to come together. And I do believe it starts a lot with the federal government reaching out and helping the folks and coming into the states and making better comments and addressing the issue instead of ignoring it. We know what happened by ignoring illegal immigration. Let's come together and remind people what started this country and what we need to do to continue to make this country grow and to prosper once again as it needs to do. Thank you.
Mike Lee, your opportunity on the subject.
Your question, which is a good one, reminds me of something my wife often tells our 3 children. That is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think we as citizens need to remember that sometimes, and it helps explain how there doesn't have to be this irreconcilable tension between free speech rights on the one hand and religious liberty rights on the other hand. If citizens will remember that with rights come responsibilities, responsibilities that include being respectful and deferential toward our fellow citizens, those two things don't have to be at odds with each other, and they won't. If we care about the feelings of others, which I think all of us do deep down, certainly all people who are Christians or Muslims or Jews, and most people of other faiths or of no faith at all share that belief, then we can reconcile that, and we don't have to be enemies simply because we might worship at a different altar.